Montana, 1883. Winter was closing in like a noose. Elena Hayes stood between starvation and her 7-year-old daughter, Lily. The valley lay buried under fresh snow, every breath stinging the lungs, every gust carrying the sharp bite of pine and ice. She pressed her forehead to the frost-etched window pane. Beyond the glass, the wheat field was a ruin. Last night's storm had torn through it, leaving behind rivers of mud where green shoots should have been pushing up. The topsoil was gone, washed downstream, lost forever. Like the last of their coins, Silas had fed to card tables, whiskey bottles, and the painted smiles of women who didn't ask questions. The cabin groaned under its own weight. 3 places in the roof leaked steadily. Tin buckets caught the drips, plink, 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 like a slow, mocking clock counting down their luck. Mama. Lily's small hand tugged the hem of her skirt. Wide blue eyes looked up, too old for 7. Are the crops really gone this time? Elena knelt, so they were eye to eye. She forced the corners of her mouth upward. The smile felt like cracking ice. Not all of them, sweetheart. We'll manage. We always do. But managing was becoming a lie. She told herself more than her daughter. Silas had been gone 3 weeks. No letter, no telegram, not even a rumor carried back from Blackwood. The farm they'd carved from wilderness demanded 3 pairs of hands. 1 woman and 1 child weren't enough, no matter how early she rose or how late the lantern burned. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and let her gaze sweep the small world she was trying to hold together. The weathered cabin with its sagging porch, the rickety barn that housed their single milk cow, the half-drowned field that had once promised bread. When's Papa coming home? Lily asked. The question came out light, practiced, the way a child learns to speak of ghosts without waking them. Soon, Elena said, the word thin as smoke. She didn't mention Sheriff Ezekiel Reed's visit last week while she was in town buying thread. Silas's older brother. Same sharp jaw, same storm gray eyes, but where Silas wore charm like cheap cologne, Ezekiel wore duty like armor. He'd leaned against the mercantile counter, voice low. Silas owes money, Elena. A man's debts follow him, and they follow his family. The implication had settled cold in her stomach. Ezekiel would collect, family or not. Thunder rolled across the valley, low and warning. The sky had gone the color of wet slate. Let's get inside before it opens up again, she told Lily. Fat drops were already striking their shoulders by the time they reached the porch. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of yesterday's porridge. Lily, stay here. Make yourself some of the good porridge with the last of the honey. I'll fetch firewood from the barn. Won't be long. Can I come? Not this time, love. Keep the fire going. Elena pulled her shawl tighter and stepped back into the cold. The yard was already turning to slurry under her boots. The barn door hung slightly ajar. She frowned. She latched it every night, every single night. She pushed it open with her shoulder. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of hay, old leather, and something metallic, blood. The milk cow shifted in her stall, blowing uneasily through her nostrils. Thin gray light fell through gaps in the planks, striping the dirt floor. Everything looked as it should. Haystack, old saddle sealas never used, neat pile of split firewood in the far corner. Then the sound came again. A low, ragged rasp, breathing through wet cloth. From behind the hay bales, where the shadows gathered deepest, her heart struck once, hard against her ribs. She hadn't brought the rifle. Another breath labored, wet, fading. She thought of running back for the gun, of riding to Blackwood for Ezekiel. She didn't move. One step, then another. Eyes adjusted to the gloom. The shadow resolved into shape. A man, slumped against the back wall, half sitting, half fallen. Broad-shouldered, long-limbed, but curled in on himself now, knees drawn up, head dropped forward. Dark hair hung in wet, tangled ropes across his face. Beneath it, the hard line of a jaw, the sharp angle of a cheekbone. His shirt was torn open across the chest. Blood had soaked it from collar to hem, dark and heavy. It had spread beneath him in a slow, sticky pool on the packed dirt. A pistol lay just beyond his outstretched right hand, not raised, fallen, fingers that had lost their grip. Elena stared. Why her barn? If he was hurt this badly, and he was badly, why not the doctor in Blackwood? Why not any door but hers? Hiding. She took another step, close enough now to see his chest rise. Barely, shallow, but moving, alive. Then a whimper, small, thin, coming from somewhere against his body. Muffled, trembling. Her gaze dropped, tucked into the folds of his ruined shirt, pressed so close they might have been part of him, were two wolf pups. Barely bigger than rabbits, light gray fur matted flat with rain and mud. One curled beneath his arm, nose buried against his ribs. The other flattened to his chest, tiny body rising and falling in time with his faltering breaths. They whimpered again, small, frightened sounds, the kind that came from creatures cold and scared and out of places to run. First thought, feral, teeth, attack, but they were tiny, scrawny, shivering. No bared teeth, no tucked tails, no growl, just two small lives clinging to a bleeding man like he was the only safe place in the world. Clinging to him in a way that made no sense. Something in Elena's chest went soft and tight at the same time. She crouched slowly, arms resting on her knees. The smaller pup lifted its head a fraction. Blue eyes, impossibly bright, met hers for one heartbeat. What is a wounded outlaw on the brink of death doing cuddling wolf pups? The question lodged in her throat, wordless but insistent. She stayed there in the half-light, watching the shallow rise and fall of his chest, listening to the tiny whimpers, feeling the first quiet stirring of something she didn't yet have a name for. She should have run for the sheriff. Instead, she stayed, and the golden-eyed man she just saved was about to burn her entire world to the ground. Elena remained crouched in the dim barn for what felt like hours, though the storm outside had barely moved the sky darker. The air hung heavy with the mingled scents of fresh hay, old blood, and the damp, musky fur of the pups. Every shallow breath the stranger took rattled wetly in his chest. Every tiny whimper from the little wolves twisted something deep inside her. Leave him. The thought arrived sharp and practical. She had a daughter waiting in the cabin, a roof that leaked, a cow that needed milking before full dark, a life already fraying at every seam. The sensible thing, the safe thing, was to back out quietly, latch the door as she always did, ride to Blackwood at first light, and tell Ezekiel Reed there was a wanted man bleeding in her barn. She looked again at the blood pooling beneath him, dark and spreading like spilled ink, at the way his breathing stuttered every few seconds, as though each one cost him more than the last, at the pups, two fragile, shivering bundles, curled so tightly against him they might have been trying to hold his life inside his body by sheer will. She couldn't do it. "All right," she whispered to the empty air. "All right." Decision made, she moved quickly. She fetched an old horse blanket from the rail, musty with years of disuse, but clean enough, and spread it over a thick bed of straw in the farthest stall, the one the cow never used. Then she returned to him. She knelt again, gripped his arms, strong even in unconsciousness, and pulled. The pups reacted instantly, not with teeth or snarls, just desperate resistance. The larger one pressed its whole small body against his ribs, tiny claws hooking deep into the ruined fabric of his shirt. The smaller one crawled higher, wedging itself between his neck and shoulder, and let out a thin, piercing whine that sliced straight through Alina's ribs. She froze, released him. "Hey," she said, softer than she had spoken to anyone in years. "Don't be scared." The larger pup turned its head toward her. One dark eye watched, wary but not hostile. Its whole body still trembled. Alina held very still. Then, slowly, she extended her right hand, palm up, fingers loose. Just there, waiting. The pup sniffed. Cold nose brushed her fingertips. A growl barely audible, more vibration than sound. A warning without real threat behind it. "I don't know you." "I know," she murmured, "but I need to help him, and I can't do that with you both sitting right there." She kept her hands steady. Another sniff. A long, considering pause. Then the pup pressed its small head into her palm. Something cracked open in Alina's chest, small but irrevocable. The fur was softer than she expected, damp from rain and blood, yet impossibly fine beneath. She curled her fingers gently, scratching behind one velvety ear. The pup shivered all over, then leaned into the touch. "There you are," she whispered. "See, it's all right." She moved her hand to the smaller one, still flattened against the man's throat. This pup flinched at first contact, let out another high whine, and tried to burrow deeper into the crook of his neck. "Come now," Alina coaxed, voice low and even. "You're soaking wet, both of you. You'll catch your death out here." She stroked down its narrow back, slow, steady strokes. The pup turned its head. Small, pointed face. Blue eyes too bright, too aware for something so young. Then, with a tiny, resigned sigh, it unclenched. Alina gathered them carefully, one in each arm. The larger pup tucked itself immediately against her collarbone, nose pressed to the hollow of her throat. The smaller one watched her a long moment, ears twitching, before giving in and curling close. She settled them on the dry straw nearby, wrapping the edge of the blanket around their small bodies. They huddled together, noses touching, still shivering, but quieter now. Only then did she return to the man. She dragged him this time without resistance, His weight was shocking, heavy, solid, even limp, but she managed, inch by inch, until he lay on the blanket. His head lolled to the side. Dark hair fell across his face like spilled ink. She ran back to the cabin at a near run. Sharp paring knife. Pot of water set to heat on the stove. Clean cloths from the mending pile. Lily sat at the table, both pups now in her lap, stroking them with reverent fingers. Elena didn't pause to explain. She gathered what she needed and returned. Up close, the wounds were worse than she'd first thought. 3 ragged entry points across his chest and left side. The skin around them angry, swollen, hot to the touch, still seeping sluggishly. 3 bullet holes, and he was still breathing. No time to wonder how. She picked up the knife. The first bullet lay close to the surface. She could feel its hard, round shape just beneath the torn flesh. Her fingers, steady from years of mending, stitching, skinning, worked carefully. The metal came free with a wet pop. She set it aside on a scrap of cloth. The second was deeper. Her hand trembled not from fear, but from the sheer effort of precision when every instinct screamed to hurry. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. Kept going. Found it. Pulled. The third was the worst. No glint of metal visible. She pressed deeper than felt safe, fingers sliding through hot, slick tissue. For horrible seconds, there was only give and blood. Then the unmistakable resistance of lead. She hooked the blade tip and drew it out. The bullet came free with an awful, sucking sound. Elena pressed both hands to the worst wound, cloth wadded tight. Her arms ached. Her fingers were slick and red. Her heart hammered so hard she felt it in her teeth, in her temples, behind her eyes. And then beneath her palms, she felt something. Warmth. Not the dull, sick heat of fever. Something deeper. Alive. A steady, pulsing throb that traveled up through her hands, into her wrists, settling somewhere behind her breastbone. For one strange, breathless moment, the ground beneath her seemed to shift. She jerked her hands back, stared at them, blood-streaked, trembling. Exhaustion, she told herself. The cold, the shock. She pressed the cloth down again. Held firm, he woke without warning. One moment he was slack, pale, barely there. The next his eyes flew open. Elena jerked back. Gold, not brown, not amber, pure, burning gold, like sunlight caught in molten metal. Unfocused, wild, his body moved before his mind caught up. One hand reached out, grasping empty air. The word came broken, barely a rasp. Fingers curled and uncurled against the straw. My kids, where are my kids? His head dropped back, eyes fluttered shut. Gone again. Elena stayed where she was, kneeling in the quiet barn, the storm rumbling distantly overhead. My kids. He'd said it like a prayer. She thought of the pups, the way they'd clung, whimpered when she moved them away. They were wolves. Just frightened creatures staying close to the only safety they knew. That was all. She finished wrapping his wounds with careful, tight bandages. Then she stood, wiped her hands on her skirt, and went back to the cabin. Inside, the pups were on the floor by the hearth. The larger one sprawled on its back, all 4 paws waving lazily as it batted at Lily's dangling fingers. The smaller one had planted itself against her shin, pushing insistently, letting out a series of small, indignant whines. They both want to be petted at the same time, Lily explained, breathless with laughter. She scratched behind the larger one's ears with one hand, while the smaller tried to climb into her lap. Watch, every time I pay attention to one, the other does this. As if on cue, the smaller shoved the larger sideways and wedged itself into the exact spot. The larger shook itself with tremendous dignity, then tried again. Elena watched them jockey and shove and huff at each other, each convinced Lily belonged entirely to them. Fighting over her attention, the way children fight over a new friend. Something ached behind her ribs. She didn't know what she had just invited into her life, but she knew she couldn't send them back into the storm. Morning would reveal a $600 bounty on his head, and a choice that would either save her daughter or destroy them both. Morning arrived gray and quiet, the storm finally spent. Snow had fallen in the night, light, powdery, drifting against the cabin walls like silent accusation. The air outside smelled clean and sharp, of frozen pine and wet earth beginning to thaw beneath the thin white layer. Elena stepped quietly into the main room. Lily was already on the floor again. Where else? With both pups sprawled across her lap in a hopeless tangle of dark fur and twitching limbs. The larger one had its nose buried in the remains of Lily's breakfast bowl, pink tongue flicking at the last crumbs of porridge with determined focus. The smaller one lay on its back, all four paws in the air, letting Lily scratch its belly with an expression of such drowsy, profound contentment that Elena almost smiled despite everything. They slept with me, Lily said without looking up, fingers moving in slow circles through soft gray fur. Well, I slept with them. They were cold. Lily, the word came out more sigh than scold. They curled up against me, Mama. They chose to. As if to prove the point, the belly pup sneezed, a tiny, violent jolt that scrunched its eyes shut and sent its whole small body bouncing. Lily dissolved into giggles, the sound bright and unguarded in the dim cabin. Elena watched them a moment longer than she intended. The easy warmth of it, the way the pups had slipped into Lily's world overnight, as though they had always belonged there, sprawled, playful, fighting gently for her attention like siblings over the last piece of candy. But the pantry was nearly bare. Flour, salt, cornmeal, maybe dried beans if she could stretch the last coins. Mrs. Calder in Blackwood might extend credit again grudgingly, with that pinched look and those small, disapproving sighs, but she would. She always did. I'm going to town, Elena told Lily. For supplies. You stay here. Do not go near the man in the barn. Do you understand? Lily nodded, serious. One pup lifted its head at the movement, ears perking, then flopped back with a contented huff. The ride to Blackwood was short but cold. Wind cut through her shawl. The main street was a slurry of mud and melting snow. Horses stood tied outside the mercantile, heads low, breath steaming. She tied her own mare, stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled. A handful of women clustered near the counter glanced up quick, assessing looks, then returned to their conversation in lowered voices. Elena ignored them. She moved through the narrow aisles, gathering what she could afford: a small sack of flour, a tin of salt, a few pounds of cornmeal. Dried beans were too dear. She counted coins carefully at the counter. Mrs. Calder rang them up with thin lips. "Credit again, Elena. Just this once more. Silas will settle when he's back." A small, skeptical sound, but she wrapped the purchases. Elena turned to leave, tacked to the board beside the door, among notices for lost livestock, church socials, and the latest grain prices, was a wanted poster. She almost walked past it. Something made her stop. The sketch was rough, charcoal lines hurried and uneven. But the face was unmistakable: sharp jaw, dark hair falling across the forehead, hard angles softened only by unconsciousness in her barn last night. Her stomach dropped like a stone into deep water. Wanted Harlon Voss $600 reward robbery, and assault dead or alive, last seen in the Blackwood vicinity. Approach with caution. Armed and dangerous. Harlon, she knew his name now. And she knew what the law said he was: a criminal, a fugitive, a man with a price on his head high enough to make even honest folk think twice. The ride home passed in a numb blur. Mud sucked at the horse's hooves. Wind stung her cheeks. Her jaw was set so tight it ached. She would tend him one more time. She wasn't heartless, but she wasn't stupid. Harboring a wanted man was the kind of mistake that brought sheriffs and Ezekiel to your door with questions she couldn't answer. She tied the horse, carried the supplies inside, then walked straight to the barn. Pushed the door open. Stopped. Harlon was on the ground, propped against the back wall, legs stretched out, head tipped back. Awake. Both pups were with him again, the larger one curled against his side, tucked under his arm, gray fur rising, and falling with each of his breaths, completely at ease. The smaller one had claimed his chest, draped across it like a living scarf, small ribs expanding and contracting in perfect rhythm. One of Harlan's hands rested on the larger pup's back, fingers buried in fur, scratching slow, idle circles. He murmured something so low she almost missed it. Right there, son. I've got you." The smaller pup let out a sleepy sigh and pressed deeper into his chest. The larger rolled onto its back, pawed at his hand until he shifted to scratch its belly. "Good," Harlon murmured. "That's good. You're all right." He said it the way you speak to something very small that has been frightened for too long. Elena stood in the doorway and forgot entirely what she had come to say. The light from the open door fell across him, across the man, and the two small wolves draped over him like they were extensions of his body. And something in her chest did a slow, quiet turn. "It's the pups," she told herself. "That's all. They're very small. He's gentle with them. It's a sad picture. A wounded man and two frightened little things, all alone in the world, clinging to each other." The larger pup opened one eye, spotted her, and closed it again. Apparently, she wasn't worth investigating. The smaller one didn't stir. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Stepped inside. Harlon noticed her then. His gaze lifted. "Ma'am." Voice still rough, scraped raw. He swallowed, tried again. "I'm sorry for the trouble. Don't move." Sharper than she intended. She set the fresh water and cloth down, knelt beside him, reached for the edge of his bandage. He watched her hands, then her face. With visible effort, pushed himself straighter against the wall. Both pups shifted, grumbling, readjusting to the movement like sleepy children. "We should go," he said. "You and your daughter. You don't need this. Me here. You can barely sit up. I heal fast." She looked at him, at the lingering gray tinge beneath his skin, at the way his jaw tightened against the pain of moving. "You had 3 bullet wounds. You were unconscious for most of 2 days. Something flickered in his expression. Pride, maybe. The quiet, stubborn kind. "I don't want to be a burden." "Then stop arguing and let me check your bandages." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. She unwrapped the first bandage carefully. What she saw made her pause. The flesh around the wound was pink, not angry red, not swollen, not the hot, infected mess it had been yesterday. It looked better, days better. She frowned, said nothing, rewrapped it, moved to the second. Same thing, healing faster than any man had a right to. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought, she told herself, not quite believing it. "Thank you," Harlon said while she worked. "For what you did, for not," he stopped. His gaze dropped to the pups still draped across him. "For not turning us out." Us. He was talking about the pups. Elena tied off the last bandage, sat back, studied him, the way his hand had drifted back to the larger pup without him seeming to notice. The way he spoke to them soft, protective, unguarded. "They're very attached to you," she said carefully. Something softened in his face. "They are. How did you end up with them?" He looked at her for a long moment, longer than the question seemed to warrant. "They're mine," he said, simply. Like that was the whole answer, before she could press. "What do you mean, they're yours?" The barn door banged open. Lily appeared, flushed and breathless, clearly having run from the cabin. "Mama, are you?" She stopped, saw Harlon, stared with open, unguarded curiosity. Harlon met her gaze, slowly gave her a small nod. "Hello," Lily grinned, and then both pups woke properly. It happened all at once. The larger one's head snapped up. Ears perked. Dark eyes found Lily in the doorway. A small, eager sound, half whine, half bark. The smaller one followed a beat later. Lifted its face from Harlan's chest. Spotted Lily. Let out a noise that could only be described as delighted. They launched off him like they'd been fired from a slingshot, scrambling over each other in haste. The larger one tumbled entirely off his lap, hit the ground with a soft thump, righted itself, bounded toward Lily. The smaller one made it 2 steps before tripping over its own paws and face planting into the straw. It got up, shook itself, kept going. Lily dropped to her knees, laughing. They hit her at the same time. The larger one pressed its whole body against her chest, tail wagging so hard its rear end swayed. The smaller one climbed into her lap and immediately began licking her face with furious, sloppy enthusiasm. Oh, stop. Lily was giggling so hard she could barely breathe, trying to gently push the smaller one's tongue away from her nose. It licked her chin instead. Elena looked at Harlon. Something in his face had gone very still, very soft. The hard edges, the weariness, the pride that wouldn't bend, all of it smoothed away just for a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. "One more night," he said quietly, like it cost him something to admit it. "Then we'll be gone. I swear it." What would you do if a stranger with a bounty on his head looked at your child like she was the safest place in his world and asked for just one more night? By sunrise, the bullet holes were gone, smooth skin, and the heat in his gaze promised something far more dangerous than any wanted poster ever could. Dawn crept into the barn on pale, watery light. The storm had left behind a stillness so deep it felt almost reverent. Snow lay fresh outside the cracked door, muffling every sound except the occasional drip from the eaves and the soft snuffle of the cow in her stall. The air inside still carried traces of yesterday: hay, faint copper of old blood, the clean wet earth scent of the pups' fur after they'd dried by the hearth. Elena carried a fresh pail of water and clean strips of cloth torn from an old sheet. Her boots left dark prints on the straw. She paused just inside the threshold, letting her eyes adjust. The pups were not with Harlon this time. They lay sprawled in a patch of hay near the door, tangled together in the boneless way only very young creatures can manage after a night of wrestling and dreaming. The larger one had one paw draped possessively across the smaller's back. The smaller had its face buried so deep in the straw that only its ears poked out, twitching now and then at invisible sounds. She stepped past them quietly. The larger pup cracked one eye open at her approach, regarded her drowsily, then yawned, a wide pink cavern of tiny teeth, before flopping back with a sigh. "Good morning to you, too," she murmured. The smaller one's ears flicked. That was all. She crossed to where Harlon sat against the wall, properly sitting now, not slumped. His posture was straighter than it had any right to be after 3 bullet wounds. His dark hair was pushed back from his face, revealing the sharp planes of his features more clearly in the morning light. He looked up as she approached. "Morning," he said, voice still rough, but stronger. "Morning," she knelt, set the pail and cloths beside him. "Let's see how you're doing." She reached for the edge of the outermost bandage. He lifted a hand as though to stop her, instinct, perhaps. But when her fingers brushed his skin, he stilled. She began to unwrap. The first layer came away easily, dry, no fresh blood seeping through. She frowned, kept going. Second layer, third. The cloth fell away into her hands. She stared. The wounds were gone, smooth, warm skin where 3 ragged holes had torn through him only yesterday. Not even the faint pink of new scar tissue. Nothing, just unmarked flesh rising and falling with steady breaths. Elena reached out without thinking. Her fingertips pressed gently to the place where the first bullet had entered. Nothing, no ridge, no discoloration. She moved to the second spot, the third, all the same hole. Perfect. "This isn't possible," she said, looking up at him. Harlon was watching her carefully. Not defensive, just waiting to see what she would do with the truth she had just touched. "And yet," he said quietly, she didn't pull her hand away. It stayed there, resting against his chest. Beneath her palm she could feel his heartbeat, strong, even alive in a way 3 bullet wounds should never have allowed. was there again, too. That same deep, pulsing heat she'd felt when she pulled the bullets free. She had told herself it was fever then. It wasn't fever now. It was something else entirely. Something that seemed to travel up through her fingers, into her wrists, settling behind her ribs like a second pulse, trying to match his. Harlan's gaze dropped to where her hand rested against his skin, then lifted slowly to her face. "You're staring," he said. The ghost of amusement touched the edges of his mouth, but his eyes remained serious, gold-flecked, burning low. "You healed," she said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Overnight, from 3 gunshot wounds." She stopped, swallowed. Her hand was still there. She could feel the heat of him radiating against her palm, steady and alive. "People don't do that." He held her gaze. "No," he agreed. "They don't." The air between them thickened, heavy, charged, like the moment before thunder cracks. "Move your hand," she told herself. "Get up. Go back to the cabin." She didn't move. Harlan's gaze dropped again to her hand, to the place where her fingers rested against him. And this time, he didn't look away. Instead, his own hand came up slowly, settled over hers. For one dizzying, breathless moment, the barn seemed to tilt sideways. The only solid thing in the world was the press of his palm against the back of her hand, warm, calloused, impossibly steady. "What are you?" she asked softly. He looked at her for a long moment. "Someone who was made for you." She stared. He stared back. No playfulness now. Nothing guarded. Just that raw, open, almost aching look. "That doesn't answer my question," she whispered. "No," he said. "I suppose not." And then he leaned in. It was slow. Slow enough that she could have stopped it. Slow enough that she saw it coming, saw the way his eyes dropped to her mouth, saw the slight forward tilt of his body. She didn't stop him. When his mouth found hers, the world went quiet. She leaned into him, into the warmth, into the pull that had been tugging at her since the moment she first pressed her hands to his wounds and felt that impossible pulse beneath her fingers. She kissed him back. It was the kind of kiss that happens when something has been building for too long in too small a space, and the pressure finally finds an opening. His mouth was warm and firm. When his thumb traced the line of her jaw, she made a small sound she hadn't meant to make. One of the pups sneezed. Neither of them noticed. The smaller one sneezed again, louder this time, a full-body shudder that sent it rolling sideways into a pile of hay. It blinked, dazed, shook itself out with great dignity. They still didn't notice. What broke the moment wasn't the pups. It was a voice from outside, rough, too loud, unmistakably familiar, carried on the wind. "Elena, where the hell are you? Horse needs watering and I'm Sela's." The name landed like a stone in still water. Elena jerked back. Harlan's hand tightened briefly on hers. Instinct, then released. She stood, heart hammering, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand as though she could erase the taste of him. Silas's boots hit the porch with heavy, uneven thuds. The cabin door creaked open, thrown wide. She turned toward the sound, every nerve alight. Harlan stayed where he was still seated against the wall, but his body had gone taut. Coiled, ready. The pups lifted their heads at the same moment, ears forward, small bodies stiffening. Outside, Silas's voice rolled again, drunk, impatient, filling the yard. "Elena, get out here." She looked back at Harlon once. His eyes were already shifting, gold flaring brighter, burning. Not yet, not here. But the air in the barn had changed. Something inevitable had just stepped onto the porch. Silas was home, drunk, violent, and completely unaware the man watching him through the window wasn't just a stranger. He was a predator who would kill to protect what was his. Silas Reed filled the cabin doorway like smoke, thick, acrid, impossible to ignore. He shrugged off his coat with exaggerated care, letting it drop to the floor in a wet heap. His face was ruddy from cold and whiskey, eyes glassy and bright in that unfocused way that meant he'd been drinking since before first light. The smell of cheap liquor and stale tobacco rolled in with him. "Elena," he drawled, voice too loud for the small space. "There you are." She stood frozen near the window, back to the wall, heart slamming against her ribs. Through the frost-laced pane, she could see Harlon outside, half turned toward the cabin, body coiled like a spring. His eyes caught hers for one burning second. Gold, furious, wild, she gave the smallest shake of her head. "No, stay back. Keep hidden." Something tightened in his jaw. For a terrible heartbeat, she thought he would ignore her, storm through the door anyway, damn the consequences. He didn't. But he didn't step away from the window either. His stillness said, "I'm right here." Silas didn't notice. He was already swaying toward the table, boots leaving muddy prints on the worn floorboards. "Miss me?" he asked, the words slurring into something that might have been charming once. "You're back early." Cards went bad. A dismissive wave. "Doesn't matter. I'm home now." He looked around the cabin, at the patched table, the low fire, the general air of things held together by will alone. His lip curled. "Hell, Elena, have you even tried to keep this place up while I was gone?" She didn't rise to it. She had learned long ago that rising only fed the fire. "I've been managing. Barely." He dropped into the head chair, his chair, and stretched his legs out. His gaze drifted over her, slow and appraising. "You look tired." Then softer, with a smile meant to be winning. "Come here. Sit with me." The "come here" landed like a summons. Her stomach twisted. "I need to check on Lily." "Lily can wait." He reached out, caught her wrist, fingers tight. "I've been gone 3 weeks. Don't you want to, Silas?" She extracted her wrist with careful force. "You're drunk." "I'm relaxed." The smile soured at the edges. "You know, I met a woman in Laramie. Name of Clara. Lovely thing. Didn't complain when a man wanted company." The words landed flat. She felt nothing, or rather, she felt the nothing very precisely, like pressing a bruise and finding it numb. "How nice for you." His smile flickered. He didn't like being dismissed. "Don't be like that." He stood, chair scraping back. "I provide for this family. The least you could do is—" Elena glanced toward the window again. Harlon was still there, closer now, gold eyes fixed on Silas with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. Silas kept talking. "Act like a wife when I'm actually home." A small voice from the doorway to the back room. "Papa." Lily stood there, small and uncertain, one hand on the doorframe. Behind her, in the shadows of the hallway, two small, dark shapes pressed close together. Silas turned. "Go back to your room, Lily." She didn't move. Her chin lifted just a fraction. "I want to stay." His face changed. Charm dropped away like a mask slipping. What was underneath was small, petty, and too drunk to hide. "Hell, child, do as you're told." He took a step toward her. A growl interrupted low, vibrating from near Lily's feet. The larger pup had its hackles raised, a dark ridge of fur standing stiff along its spine. The smaller one stood beside it, body vibrating with attention, lips peeled back just enough to show tiny white teeth. Silas looked down, blinked. "What the?" The larger pup barked sharp, loud. The smaller snarled again and took a step forward. Irritation flashed across Silas's face. Not fear, not yet, just annoyance. "Shut up." He reached down and grabbed the smaller pup by the scruff. The sound it made was terrible, a thin, strangled yelp, high and desperate and wrong. Lily cried out, lurched forward. Silas lifted the pup to chest height, dangling it with one hand, squeezing just enough to make it squirm. Mangy little, the cabin door blew open. It swung wide and slammed against the wall with a crack that echoed like gunfire. Harlon filled the doorway. Shirtless, hair wild, chest bare and smooth where wounds should have scarred him. Every line of his body taut, coiled, ready to spring. His eyes were gold, not the burning lamplight gold from before. This was something rower, something barely leashed. Silas took an involuntary step back before he caught himself. "Put him down," Harlon said. The words were quiet, utterly calm. Silas stared. For one long, suspended second, some animal part of him recognized danger, even through the whiskey haze. It wasn't enough. "Who the hell are you?" Grip tightened. Knuckles went white. Harlon took one step into the cabin. The air seemed to thicken, charge, like the moment before lightning strikes. "I said," Harlon repeated, voice dropping lower. "Put my kid down." Silas opened his mouth to argue. Harlon crossed the room in 2 strides. His fingers closed around Silas's wrist and moved it effortless, like breaking a dry twig. The grip shattered. The pup dropped. Harlon caught it one-handed, pressed it to his chest. The small body went still, safe, silent. Then he pushed Silas, one flat palm against Silas's sternum. Silas flew backward through the open door, off the porch, into the mud of the yard with a wet, graceless thud. Silence fell. Absolute. Harlon stood in the doorway, pup cradled against him, breathing steady. "Sleep it off in the barn," he said. Not a suggestion. Silas lay in the mud for a long moment. Then he lifted his head, spat, wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. He looked up at Harlon, who stood framed in the doorway, calmly wiping mud from his palm. Slowly, without a word, Silas pushed himself up and staggered toward the barn. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Inside the cabin, the quiet was enormous. Harlon turned. The smaller pup still pressed to his chest. His eyes were still gold, bright, furious, protective. Elena watched him pace once, twice, across the small room. The need to touch him, to smooth the tension from his shoulders, to feel that impossible warmth again, was sudden and overwhelming. She folded her arms, held herself still. "Harlon," he stopped, turned, The look on his face, she had seen him gentle, seen him quiet, seen him guarded. This was none of those things. He touched them, he said, voice rough, almost a growl. He put his hands on the pup is fine. She kept her voice steady. It was awful, I'm sorry. But they're not pups, are they? The words came out hard, flat. What? Harlon looked at her. The gold in his eyes still burned. They're not pups, he said again. Quieter this time. They're my children. The confession hung between them like smoke. Elena stared. The wolf pups vanished. In their place stood two terrified toddler boys clinging to Lily, whispering the secret Harlon had carried alone for years. The cabin felt smaller after the door slammed shut behind Sela's. The fire crackled low in the hearth, throwing sharp shadows across the walls. Harlon paced, 3 steps one way, 3 back, his bare feet silent on the worn boards. The smaller pup still clung to his chest, small face buried against his skin, breathing in shallow, exhausted hitches. The larger one had followed Lily to the back room without hesitation, tail low but trusting. Elena stood near the table, arms folded tight across her chest. The taste of Harlon's kiss still lingered on her lips, warm, urgent, forbidden. The need to close the distance between them throbbed behind her ribs like a second heartbeat. She dug her nails into her forearms to keep still. Harlon, she said again. Quiet, firm. He stopped pacing, turned. The gold in his eyes hadn't faded. It burned steady now, fury banked, but not gone. He touched them. The words came out rough, edged with something close to a growl. He put his hands on the pup is fine. She kept her voice level, though her pulse hammered. It was awful, I'm sorry. But they're not pups, are they? Harlon looked at her, really looked. The anger in his face fractured just for a second into something rawer. Tired, exposed. They're not pups, he repeated, softer. They're my children. The words landed heavy, hung in the smoky air. Elena stared. He nodded toward the back room where Lily had taken them. Go see, then come back and tell me what you see. She held his gaze a long moment longer, then turned. She heard them before she reached the doorway, small, hiccuping cries. The kind that came from very young throats, still learning how to shape grief and fear into sound. 2 voices, thin, frightened. She pushed the door open. Lily sat on the floor, back against the side of the bed. Her arms were full. 2 little boys, naked, shivering, no more than 3 years old, pressed against her chest. 1 on each side, their small fingers twisted desperately into the fabric of Lily's dress. Tears streaked their dirt-smudged faces. Snot ran from tiny noses. Their breaths came in ragged, hiccuping sobs. Lily looked up. Her own face was pale, eyes wide with shock. They changed, she whispered. Mama, they just changed. Her voice wobbled. She looked down at the boys trembling against her. They're so scared. Elena didn't move for one long, breathless second. Then she crossed the small room in 2 strides and dropped to her knees in front of them. Oh, she breathed. Oh, sweethearts. She opened her arms. The smaller boy went first, peeled himself away from Lily with a broken little sound, and stumbled forward. Elena caught him against her chest. He pressed his face into the hollow of her neck and let out a raw, shuddering exhale of relief. The larger one followed a heartbeat later. He tucked himself against his brother's side, cheek to Eleanor's collarbone, and went very still, like he was afraid moving would make the safety disappear. She held them both tight, one hand cradling the back of each small head. "It's all right," she murmured into their hair. "I've got you." The smaller boy's breathing slowed by degrees, hitching less, warming against her. The larger one hadn't moved, just pressed closer. A small, solid weight. Warm, real. They were children, my kids. Harlon had rasped the words in the barn half dead, barely conscious. Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them, Harlon stood in the doorway. One shoulder braced against the frame. One hand gripping the wood so hard the knuckles stood white. He was watching her hold his son's. The look on his face cracked something open inside her chest. "Let's put them down," she said quietly. To him, to the room. He nodded, pushed off the frame, came to help. Together, they eased the boys onto the narrow cot. Elena pulled the quilt over them, tucked it around small shoulders. The larger boy, Finn, she would learn later, curled immediately around his brother. Theo, the smaller one. They clung to each other even in sleep, faces slack with exhaustion. Lily watched from the floor, knees drawn up, chin resting on them. "Are they going to be all right?" she asked. "Yes," Harlon said simply. Then softer, "Thank you for holding them." Lily nodded, serious, solemn, far older than 7 in that moment. "I won't tell anyone." Harlon gave her a small, real smile, quiet and a little sad. "I know, sweetheart." Elena shepherded Lily to her own bed, kissed her forehead, whispered good night, closed the door softly. When she returned to the main room, Harlon stood by the fire, staring into the flames. The light threw harsh shadows across his face. For the first time since she'd found him bleeding in her barn, he looked like he might come apart at the seams. The pull between them was stronger now, almost painful. A low throb behind her ribs, a heat spreading outward every time he breathed. The cabin was quiet, boys asleep, Sela's in the barn, nothing left to hide behind. She crossed the room. Harlon didn't turn. "Talk to me," she said. He stayed silent a moment longer, then, "You know what I am." It wasn't a question. "I know something is different about you." She stepped closer. The healing, the eyes, the strength, the boys. He turned slowly. The careful composure he'd worn like armor since waking was gone. What was underneath was hungry, barely leashed, burning. "I'm a shifter," he said. "Wolf, I shift. So do they." He glanced toward the back room. "It's what we are." Elena took that in slowly. "And the boys," she swallowed. "They really are your children." "Yes." The pull was unbearable now, a current running through her, hot, bright, insistent. "When you said," she stopped. Her mouth had gone dry. "In the barn, before. When you said you were made for me, what did you mean?" Harlon looked at her. The pretense dropped away entirely. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopped just short of her, pupils blown wide. The gold of his irises almost swallowed. Her body screamed to close the last inches. She pressed her back to the door instead, held his gaze, waited. "I meant exactly what I said," he confessed, voice so low it was barely sound. "Every part of me has been pulling toward you since the moment you touched me." I've been fighting it every hour because you are not mine to take. His hand rose, stopped midair, fingers curled. And yet you are, he swallowed. You are mine, my mate. The confession hung raw, wrecked. Eleanor's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her own ears. I'm a married woman, she said. The words felt thin, hollow. Harlan's jaw tightened. Pain, fury, both. Silas Reed does not deserve you. His voice was stripped to truth. He doesn't see you. His hand rose again. This time he didn't stop it. Fingers brushed her jaw, gentle, reverent. Meanwhile, I have seen nothing else since the moment you put your hands on my wounds and chose not to let me die. Harlan, she whispered. You are mine, he said again. Like it was the only fact left in the world. Like law, marriage, danger, everything else was just noise. And the terrible thing, the thing that cracked her chest wide open, was that something inside her answered. It answered yes. She closed the distance herself. One step, grabbed the front of his shirt, pulled him down. The kiss was nothing like the barn. This was not slow, not careful. This was Harlan's mouth on hers like he'd been drowning, and she was air. His arm locked around her waist, hauled her flush against him. The press of his body, warm, solid, real, drew a sound from her she didn't recognize. His hand slid into her hair. She gasped against his mouth. He swallowed the sound. The kiss went deeper, hungrier, wilder, like a dam breaking. Harlan, she whispered, voice wrecked. She didn't care. Ezekiel, the sheriff, Silas's brother. Silas will talk. You know he will. If he comes here, he shushed her. Thumb moved against her scalp, shaking. His mouth moved to her jaw, her neck. Teeth grazed the skin just below her ear. Her knees went weak. His arm tightened. You have to leave, she gasped. Eyes open, gold still bright, desperate, aching. One night, he said, rough, barely a whisper. Give me one night. Let me. He stopped, swallowed. Hand tightened in her hair. I'll be gone by morning, but give me this, please. She looked at him, face open, raw, wanting her so badly it was carved into every line of him. Thought of Silas sleeping it off in the barn. Thought of everything coming. How little time they had. One night. Something in Harlan's face broke open. He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less desperate. And she let him, let herself sink into it. Stopped pretending it was anything other than what it had been since she first touched him. Inevitable. Their stolen night was fire. Dawn brought hooves on the road, and the sheriff's rifle pointed straight at the man she now called hers. Warmth woke Elena before the first gray light touched the windows. Harlan's arm lay heavy across her waist, solid and sure, his breath slow, and even against the back of her neck. She lay still for one stolen moment, letting herself feel it. The quiet press of him behind her, the steady rise and fall of his chest matching hers, the faint scent of pine smoke and clean skin that clung to him even after everything. His thumb moved once against her hip, lazy, asleep, or pretending to be. She closed her eyes, memorized the shape of his hand, the heat of his palm, the way her body fit against his like it had always known the place. Then she untangled herself carefully, sliding from beneath his arm, pulling the quilt higher over his shoulder, and rose. The cabin was hushed in the way only winter mornings could be, soft light filtering through frost, the faint creak of settling logs, the low crackle of last night's embers. She moved on instinct. Water for coffee, cornmeal into the pot. The familiar rhythm grounded her, pulled her back from the edge of what they had done, what she had allowed herself to want. Harlan stirred behind her. Sheets rustled. A low sound, half sigh, half murmur as he sat up and reached for his shirt. She glanced toward the back room without thinking. The boys were still asleep, small shapes curled together under the quilt. Lily's bed was empty. She must have slipped out early to check on them. Then she heard it. Hooves on the frozen road. One rider, coming fast. Dust or snow kicking up in the still air. Eleanor's hands stilled on the spoon. She watched through the window as the horse crested the rise. Recognized the bay gelding. The broad shoulders in the saddle. The glint of a badge. Ezekiel. The pieces fell into place, cold, obvious, inevitable. Silas's side of the barn empty this morning. Boot prints in the mud she'd noticed when fetching water. The half-mile road to Blackwood. Silas had woken. Silas had ridden to his brother. Of course he had. She set the spoon down. Turned. Harlan was already on his feet. The boys pressed to his legs, one on each side, small fists twisted in the hem of his shirt, their faces turned up to him with complete trust. They knew something was wrong. Children always did. Stay behind me, Harlan told them quietly. Firm. The same tone he'd used in the barn when they were pups and frightened. Right there. I've got you. The larger boy, Finn, nodded solemnly. Theo pressed closer to his father's leg. Grip tightened. Silent. Lily appeared from the back room, already dressed, hair pulled back. She looked at Elena. Then Harlan. Then the boys. Understanding settled over her face like a shadow, making her look far older than 7. Stay with them, Elena said, behind Harlan. Don't move. Lily nodded once. The knock came sharp, official. The kind that didn't wait for permission. Elena opened the door. Ezekiel Reed filled the frame. Tired. Deeper lines around his mouth than she remembered. His eyes moved past her into the cabin, quick sweep landing on Harlan, on the boys, on Lily, on everything at once. Something complicated shifted behind his expression. Elena, he said, flat. Step aside. I know he's in there. His gaze hadn't left Harlan. Silas told me what happened, what he is. Silas told you what Silas wanted you to hear, Elena said. She didn't move from the doorway. Which is not the same thing. A flicker, irritation, uncertainty. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by her. Move, Elena. No. The word hung between them. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. He looked at her, really looked the way he hadn't in years. For one brief moment, something almost human moved behind the sheriff's mask. Then he pushed past her. He saw Harlan first, the man standing calm in the center of the room, bare-armed, steady, gold eyes low and burning. Ezekiel's gaze snagged there, stayed. Recognition settled cold. The rifle came up. Don't, Harlan said, one word. Quiet. Utterly calm. Finger found the trigger. They faced each other across the small space. Sheriff and shifter. Rifle and gold eyes. The air pressed against Eleanor's skin. "You're coming with me," Ezekiel said. "Ezekiel," Eleanor's voice cut sharp. "Look." He didn't need to be told twice. His eyes moved past Harlon, past the man, past the threat, past everything he'd come expecting, and landed on what stood behind him. Two small boys, dressed in oversized shirts that hung past their knees, standing close together. Finn slightly in front, chin up, defiant even now. His small hand pressed flat against Theo's back, steady, protective. Theo half hidden behind his brother, one dark eye visible, watching Ezekiel with quiet, unblinking fear that stole Eleanor's breath all over again. And in front of them, between the boys and the rifle, stood Lily. She hadn't moved, feet planted, shoulders squared, small face set in fierce, stubborn determination. "You're not going to shoot them," she said, to Ezekiel, to the rifle, to the whole room. Her voice didn't shake. Ezekiel stared at her. The cabin went very quiet, just the fire settling, the wind outside, the soft, frightened breathing of two little boys. No deputies, no one to share the weight, just him. He looked at the boys again, at the way they pressed close to Harlon, not hiding behind him, but with him, like he was their fixed point in a world that had tilted. At the way Theo's face turned up to his father, seeking reassurance without words. At Finn's hand, still steady on his brother's back. At Lily, standing in front of them all, refusing to move. Something changed in Ezekiel's face. Slow, painful, like a man watching certainty rearrange itself and having no choice but to watch. He lowered the rifle. Not all the way, not yet, but enough. "What is this?" he asked. For the first time, his voice wasn't flat. It was something else. Confusion. Almost a question from a man who had come expecting one thing and found another. "This," Eleanor said, stepping forward, "is a man with his children, and my daughter. Let it sit." Ezekiel looked at her, at Harlon, at the boys, small, scared, dressed in borrowed clothes, holding each other up. "Silas said he was a monster," Ezekiel said quietly. "Silas says a lot of things." Eleanor's voice was steady. "Have you ever noticed how few of them are true?" Something sharp and uncomfortable moved across Ezekiel's face. The look of a man hearing something he'd been avoiding for years. He glanced toward the door, toward where Silas's horse stood tied beside his own. Eleanor watched him think about it. About Silas. About the brother who had sent him here to shoot a father in front of his children. "He's your brother," she said, not pushing, just stating. "And he sent you here to do his dirty work, because that's what he does, always has." Ezekiel was quiet a long time. He looked at Lily again. She looked back steady, unwavering. Her small hand had drifted back. Now it rested against Finn's shoulder. The boy leaned into it slightly. "Please," Lily said simply. "They're just kids." The word landed like a stone in still water. Ezekiel closed his eyes. When he opened them, the sheriff's mask had cracked. Something older showed through. Tired, less certain. He looked at Harlon, at the gold eyes still burning low and steady. At the hand Harlon had rested on Theo's head, gentle, automatic, the way you touch something you'd die for. He lowered the rifle the rest of the way. Let it hang at his side. "How long?" he asked. Harlon held his gaze. There 3. Ezekiel nodded once. Slowly, he turned to Elena. Silas is outside, he said. Voice flat again, but different, heavier. I'll deal with him. He said it again, quiet, certain, waited. I'll deal with him. Something in the way he said it made Elena believe it. He looked at Harlon one last time. Something passed between them, not warmth, not trust, not yet, but acknowledgement. A line drawn. Then Ezekiel Reed turned and walked out of the cabin, closed the door behind him. The quiet that followed was enormous. Harlon let out a long, shuddering breath. His hand stayed on Theo's head. The boy pressed his face against his father's hip, went very still, trying hard to be brave, and not quite managing. Finn looked up at Harlon. Papa, he said, small, matter of fact. The word filled the cabin like sunlight. Harlon knelt, gathered them both against him, one arm around each, pressed his face into the space between their heads, and held on. Elena watched from across the room. Lily slipped her hand into her mother's, leaned against her hip with the easy weight of a child who felt safe. Outside, Ezekiel's voice, sharp, low, carried on the wind, directed at Silas. Words indistinct. She didn't need to hear them. Harlon lifted his head, found her eyes across the room. The gold was fading slowly, like a fire burning down. Underneath was just brown, just a man, just the way he looked at her when no one else was watching. Elena squeezed Lily's hand, held his gaze, didn't look away. The law itself lowered its weapon, because a 7-year-old girl refused to move. But would that be enough to keep them safe? 6 months had passed since the morning Ezekiel walked out of the cabin, and the sound of his horse faded down the road. 6 months since Silas disappeared first to the jail in Blackwood for a night of sobering up. Then, further away, Ezekiel had kept his word. He dealt with his brother, not with cuffs or a cell for long, but with something quieter and more final. A one-way ticket out of Montana on the next stagecoach. A warning that the next debt he ran up would be paid in iron bars. And a look that said family only stretched so far. Elena never asked for details. She didn't need them. They left the old homestead behind before the spring thaw turned the yard to mud. Packed what little they owned into the wagon blankets, the cow, the few tools that still worked, and followed a whispered rumor north to Wolf Creek, a small settlement tucked in a sheltered valley where shifters lived openly among humans. No wanted posters on the boards. No suspicious glances when golden eyes caught the light. Sheriff Wyatt Hayes, a wolf himself, mated to a human woman named Elizabeth, had made sure of that. Wolf Creek smelled different. Pine and wood smoke, yes, but also bread baking in open ovens, children laughing without fear, the faint wild scent of fur on the wind that didn't make anyone reach for a rifle. Their new cabin sat at the edge of town, smaller than the old one, but sound. Roof tight, windows that didn't rattle, a porch where morning sun hit first. Elena woke to chaos, as most mornings began now. A crash from the kitchen area. She opened one eye, then the other. Nash, Finn's new name in this place, where old lives could be set down, was standing triumphant on a chair, arms spread wide like he'd conquered the world. Eli Theo, clung to the hem of his shirt, tugging downward with determined little grunts. "Nash," Elena said without rising. Voice calm, used to this. "I was already off the chair," Nash informed her from the floor, shirt backwards, dignity somehow intact. Eli eyed the chair again, determination clear. "Eli," she pointed the wooden spoon she just picked up. "Don't." Eli looked at the spoon, looked at the chair, looked at her, sat down on the floor beside his brother, leaned against Nash's shoulder with wounded innocence. "Sorry, Mama." She shook her head, went back to stirring porridge. Harlon came in from the yard, boots left outside, sleeves rolled to his elbows, faint scent of fresh split wood clinging to him. He crossed the room, pressed his lips to the top of Elena's head as he passed, casual, certain, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Morning," he murmured against her hair. "Morning." He crouched in front of the boys, climbed the chair again. "No," Nash lied without a flicker. Harlon raised one eyebrow. Nash held for 4 seconds, then grinned. "Maybe." Harlon tugged Nash's shirt the right way around. "Eat your breakfast, both of you." The boys scrambled up, Eli first, Nash shoving lightly behind into their seats. Elena set bowls down, watched Eli immediately stick a finger in to test the temperature, while Nash stole a spoonful from his brother's bowl when Eli wasn't looking. "Papa," Eli said without looking up. "Nash is stealing." "Am not," Nash mumbled around a mouthful. Harlon sat beside Elena. She handed him his coffee. For a moment, they simply sat side by side, watching their children eat breakfast. Lily was at the table too, older now, taller, reading aloud from a worn book of fairy tales. The boys leaned in, wrapped around her words. Nash propped his elbows on the table, chin in hands. Eli curled against her side, like he still half believed he could disappear into her warmth if needed. Harlon watched them, then looked at Elena. The gold in his eyes had become familiar, soft most days, flaring only when one of the children wandered too far or when the wind carried a stranger's scent too close. She reached under the table, found his hand, squeezed once. He squeezed back. That evening, the cabin filled with noise again. Lily read to the boys by the fire, doing voices that made Nash snort with laughter, and Eli hide his face in delighted embarrassment. Harlon sat nearby, whittling. A small wooden wolf took shape under his knife, ears perked, tail curved. Toys for the children. He'd already made a set of little horses. A bear. Whatever caught their fancy. Elena leaned in the doorway, watched the firelight move across Harlon's face, the way his mouth twitched when Lily got a voice wrong, the way the boys tucked against their sister, warm, alive, safe. Harlon looked up, caught her watching, smiled small, private, just for her. Outside, the first stars appeared. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Not loneliness, just a voice calling into the dark. "I'm here, I'm home." Elena stepped onto the porch. Harlon followed a moment later, stood behind her. Arms came around her waist, gentle, sure. She leaned back against him. The night was cold, clear, the valley below them quiet except for the occasional bark of a dog, the low murmur of voices from other cabins. "Thank you," he said against her hair. "For what?" "For choosing us." She turned in his arms, looked up at him. I didn't choose, she said softly. I just stopped running from what was already true. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushed her skin. You're mine, he said, quiet, certain. The same words he'd spoken that night 6 months ago. But now, they didn't sound like a claim. They sounded like a promise. She rose on her toes, kissed him slow, deep, unhurried. When she pulled back, she smiled. And you're ours. Inside, Lily's voice rose in laughter as Nash tried, and failed to mimic a dragon roar. The boys clapped. Delighted, Elena rested her head against Harlan's chest, listened to his heartbeat, steady, strong, felt the warmth that had once startled her now settle like home. Somewhere far off, another howl answered the first, a chorus now. Family calling family. She closed her eyes. Let the sound wrap around them. What would you do if the life you never dared dream of arrived, not in thunder and lightning, but in small feet on wooden floors, soft fur against your hand, and a man whose eyes turned gold when he looked at you like you were the safest place in his world? 6 months later in Wolf Creek, where golden eyes no longer meant danger, the sound of 4 small feet thundering across the porch told Elena everything she needed to know. Family isn't born. It's chosen. It's protected. It's fought for with teeth and claws and a mother's unyielding heart. Harlan's arms slid around her waist from behind, his voice low and certain against her ear. You're mine. She smiled, turning into the kiss she no longer had to steal. And you're ours. Inside, Lily's laughter mixed with 2 little boys roaring like dragons. Outside, 2 wolves howled into the night, not calling for help, calling their pack home. The end. If this story just punched you straight in the heart, smash that like button right now. Drop a fire in the comments if you'd have stayed in that barn. Share this with one person who needs to remember they're allowed to choose their own family. And if you want more stories that hit this hard, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Next week, we're dropping something even darker and twice as addictive. Thank you for riding with Nightbond Narratives. You're part of this pack now. See you in the next firelight.